So the title of my talk is Perspectives on the 2x2 matrix, and I'm sure that's a structure that most of you will be familiar with. Still, I hope to offer some new insights on this structure. And this is joint work with Nico Gradwohl, Dirk Streb, Daniel Arkheim, and Wolfgang Geismeier, whom I think is also with us right now. My favorite quotes of Herb Simon is this one that I currently only partially see, but it's called "Solving a problem simply means representing it so as to make the solution transparent." And that's so there's many favorite quotes of Simon, but that's my all-time favorite quote. Although I was always a bit puzzled what it actually meant if you're trying to tackle a concrete problem. So I think it is true, but it's not obvious how that is true. And I hope to make it a little bit more obvious throughout this talk. In fact, if you look at the history of psychology, or maybe even science in general, but psychology certainly, then what you find is you can basically say it's a history of representational effects, or also representational misunderstandings. So if you look at early research on Einstellung or insight, or also there's a term like functional fixedness, that very much has to do with the rigidity of certain representations, to change them in a way that is more suitable to solving a problem. The same is true for conditional reasoning. If you look at, for instance, the work on the Waste and selection task, then there's lots of representational issues surrounding the interpretation of conditionals. The same is certainly true for framing effects. There is even in the title. So if you look at the Asian disease problem, it's basically an issue of interpretation. And also the research on problem solving. If you study isomorphs of the Tower of Hanoi task, for instance, it's clear that representations are a central ingredient to solving problems, or also obstacles to not solving problems. And a very well-known example is also this duck-rabbit figure. Well, I said it already, so it can be seen both as a duck and a rabbit. And the reason why I'm illustrating it, or why I'm using it, is to show that if I explain it to somebody, like that, you can see this, the beak of the duck can also be seen as the ears of the rabbit. Once you see that, or once you have been told it, it's kind of obvious. So it's completely self-evident, and you can switch back and forth between the two interpretations. At the same time, it's not exactly what makes a great scientific theory. If I explain this to you, so one of the problems of these lines of research is often that they explain problems, but they are not able to turn that productively into theory. And the one thing that we are calling for is essentially a revolution, although the revolution is meant in a literal sense, not in the kind of big, we won't change science, but it's really in the literal sense of a change of perspective that we are calling for. And the central idea is essentially start with a common underlying representation, and then see how you can put various interpretations into that representation. So rather than starting with problems, waste and selection task, Asian disease, or Tower of Hanoi, and then showing like people find them sometimes difficult and sometimes easy, start with a representation that underlies various problems. That's the idea of this revolution. All right, let's see where that takes us. So we keep pressing this. So I only see part of my image here, but that's fine. I see the central part. So I've been haunted for this past year or so by a representation, and that representation is the 2x2 matrix. And the 2x2 matrix is known by many names. Some people refer to it as a contingency matrix. Some people say it's an error matrix. Other people say it's a confusion matrix, and I think that's actually a very fitting term, because lots of people are confused when you talk about matrix, this simple structure, and we'll see why that is so confusing sometimes. So what we are developing here is kind of it comes across as a grand model. So the idea is essentially to have a matrix lens model. And the idea is, so let's look at this as a model of scientific inquiry that explains how we reduce information. So we have the world on the left, so it's basically that's what we are interested in, and then we adopt a construct or a structure, namely the 2x2 matrix, and if you think of it, the world is kind of shining into this matrix, and then it's broken into something that we are interested in. So we are breaking it down into a measure that we're interested in. And an example of such measures is, for instance, could be absolute risk. So if I told you, if you travel to Ludwigsburg, your risk of catching a disease might be something. Or in this case, your absolute risk of dying in a certain situation that I will introduce shortly is either 30% or 80%. That's such a measure that we might be interested in. Or the positive predictive value of some test could be roughly 8%. And we'll also see in a moment that this is based on a real example. But those are the measures we're interested in. That's what kind of the science that is involved here measures in the end. And the question is, there's two questions. How do we get to these measures? And then you can also turn this and ask, how can we transparently communicate or represent these measures? And that's what this model is about. So the two examples I already hinted at. So one is the famous Titanic maiden voyage in 1912, and as you all know, it didn't make it across. So it sunk. So there's one question you could ask is, what are your survival chances given certain features of the passengers? The other example that I'm going to use is the famous mammography task. So a clinical diagnostic task where you know certain things about a test, and the question then is how likely is it that you have the disease given that you test positive in that test? So the positive predictive value of the test. And as you, so this is probably, that's the forum where I hopefully don't need to talk much about the mammography task. So I'm just I'm speeding up here at this point, and I'm just assuming that you know it. What you should know also, and the two most relevant people for that are in the room, either virtually or physically. So the Gigerenzer-Hofrage paper from 1995 argued, interestingly, they used different versions of that problem or different formats. And the ones that I'm talking about here is what you currently see is the standard probability format. So the information, prevalence, sensitivity, and false positive rate are presented in terms of probabilities. And then there's also a natural frequencies version that we know has certain benefits. And there's a short frequency version that is less well known, but also relevant in that paper. And what I'm showing here is basically what information is that is being presented in these three versions. And what you should also have in mind is what you don't see on the left-hand side right now are the correct solution rates according to a meta-analysis. And they are 4% for the first problem, 24% for the second one, for the natural frequency version, and 36% for the short menu format. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's something I will explain later again or talk about. So I said we are developing this model, so let's call it a matrix lens model. The first step of that model is it's a pipeline of processing steps, and ultimately sort of it has a lot to do with taking perspective or adopting particular perspectives on phenomena. And there's various steps that I will briefly illustrate, but really the thing that I'm going to talk about today is basically these first 3 steps, which we refer to as capture. And we are using this optical metaphor of photography essentially. So we're capturing some measure. So we look at the world, and in the end we want to say the positive predictive value, for instance, is 8%. So how do we get there? Well, it requires certain steps. The first one we call is clustering. So clustering essentially has 2 components. First of all, you choose binary dimensions. So you basically look at the world and say, okay, what binary dimensions might I be interested in? And of course, not all variables are binary, but you can binarize them. Then you take the elements, and that's kind of a spatial component. You take the elements that have identical features and arrange them. What you end up with is something called a binary grid. Here's an example. So if you take the passengers of the Titanic, 2,201 in one data set, and apply clustering to it, you could ask, okay, you could look at features like their age, and since we want to be binary, we could say, are they children or are they adults, for instance. We can look at their sex, so we could ask, are they male or female? In the data sets, or in the records of the data sets, there are only 2 genders. Okay, so we can ask their sex, and we can ask, and that's something we are interested in, is did they survive? So these are 3 binary features, and if we apply them to this data set and apply clustering, we end up with this binary grid, and it's a 3-dimensional cube. It doesn't need to be 3-dimensional, it only is because we only looked at 3 dimensions in this case. Okay, so that's clustering. Next step is framing. Framing essentially takes, again, it has 2 components. One is we are selecting 2 of the dimensions, and then we are arranging them in a spatial fashion. What we end up with is, if we do this, we end up with a 2x2 matrix. So selecting, in this case, we select the age of people, so are they adult or child, and their sex, are they male or female. And then we end up with this 2x2 matrix, and in the matrix, I didn't say that earlier, are the frequencies of the people. So how many instances of our population fall into these categories. You could also, geometrically, you could portray this as a projection of this cube along one of its axes. So we and that's important, we're collapsing across one dimension and end up with a 2x2 matrix. And this process is irreversible. So we can't, so it's really reductive. We can't go back in the other direction. That's because we are aggregating across one dimension. Of course, you can not just do this once or project along one axis, but you could also project along the other 2 axes. And you end up, in this case, it's a 3-dimensional cube, and we are selecting 2 dimensions. We end up with 3 distinct matrices. So there are 3 distinct matrices, but we can't go back to the cube once we have one of them. And actually, in case you're wondering, even if you have the boundary sums, so the sums on the edges, you can't reconstruct the original one later. So you're really losing information. That's a common feature of all the things that all these perspectives is basically we are gaining something. In this case, we are gaining abstraction and some insight into the structure of a certain question, but we're also losing something by making this transformation. All right, so that's framing. The next step, and that's the most important one, is focusing. Focusing essentially, again, is a selection process. I'm selecting certain information, but then I'm kind of zooming in. I'm isolating some aspect of the matrix, and that's really relevant. So to introduce the effect of it, let's look at the tasks that I can solve with a matrix. And what I'm doing here is now I'm basically I'm just formalizing this 2x2 matrix into 4 letters A, B, C, D. So those are the frequencies. They are not the cell positions, but the frequencies in that cell, given that I have selected 2 dimensions and arranged them, so that I'm done with my framing essentially. So if I have such a matrix, so here is one, and the experts among you will immediately recognize that this is actually the numbers in the matrix. In the top left one are actually the frequencies of the mammography problem, but that's actually irrelevant at the moment. We're just looking at it from a functional aspect. We are just asking, what can we do with this matrix? Well, with the left one, with the frequencies, we can judge, we can ask, well, how many women, or well, how many instances do we have who have both cancer and a positive test? Or how many, and then we can look at the columns or rows. We can ask how many of the women test positive? How many of the women have cancer? So those are all questions we can ask with the left matrix. What is done to get the probabilities is basically we are normalizing it, or it is being normalized. So simply, if you divide each cell by the n of the matrix, you get the probabilities. And that has certain advantages. You can ask new questions. Certain comparisons get easier. But actually, it's the same thing. So in this case here, it's really there's no big deal whether we are dealing with frequencies or probabilities in this structure. What I should say is it's kind of we are losing something, namely the n, the population size. So if we are using probabilities to talk about it from now on, we have no information about population size anymore. So we are losing something along the way. Okay, so the next thing we can do is we can, and that's what illustrates this focusing step. We can project basically if we take one of these numbers, for instance here, this one, or it doesn't matter, we could also do it here, and normalize it by its margin, or by the marginal sum. What we get down here is conditional probabilities. So we get the probability of each cell conditional of it being in a certain column. In this case, if you read C and not C as cancer and not cancer, you conditionalize on the absence or presence of cancer. And then you get certain conditional probabilities, and you can ask questions about those. And of course, you can do this not just in one direction, not column-wise, as we did now, but you could also do it by rows. And you get, again, you get conditional probabilities, but these are now normalized on the row sums. Since they're normalized on the row sums, they add up to 1 on the row now. And if you do this, and if you look at the result, what you see in general, actually, let me finish this before I say that. You can also, and that's not many people are doing this, but it's also perfectly legitimate to do it by diagonals. What you end up here is basically you can ask, well, in this case, well, if you think in terms of the example, then the diagonal contains the correct cases. So you're kind of conditionalizing on being correct in these conditional probabilities. And all that is basically, so it's mathematically simple, it's possible. The important thing is you're gaining something, namely you're gaining a very specific aspect on the matrix. So it's a specialization step. At the same time, you're losing a lot because you can't reconstruct the original anymore. You're losing information. And And that's symbolized by these arrows there, by these curvy things here, where we are showing basically what you're losing. All right, so far, yeah, those were the first 3 steps, and the important 3 steps. So we have some kind of measure now, but so far I've only defined these measures in terms of the functional tasks that I can do. I can evaluate frequencies, I can evaluate probabilities, I can do conditional probabilities. That's nice, but that's not really what you're looking for normally when you are doing science. So instead, what you typically do is you're working within a framework, and that's that's the domain you're embedded in, or also the semantics that you attribute to these dimensions in the matrix. So how can we add semantics to this? We should identify certain task domains first, and then we need to show what are the mappings that these domains use on the 2x2 matrix. If we can specify that, then we can say what these things mean in terms of these domains. And so here's a table that is probably hard to see, but what we do here is essentially we take certain domains, and these are medical diagnostics, classification, and in classification you need to distinguish between training a classifier and applying it. There's information retrieval, there's the domain of risk or perceiving risks, and there's a domain of treatments, and those are just examples. There's actually there's additional domains that we left off here now, simply because, as you will see momentarily, it gets pretty complicated with this. But what you can do now, you can say, okay, what are the typical mappings? So what are the dimensions x, y, and z in the diagonal that these domains typically use, or you can actually specify how they should configure their matrices, or at least, yeah, it's not normative in the sense that we are saying they should do it like this. It's more like later, if we define measures, we need to say what is x and what is y. Because if you, I forgot to say that earlier, the matrix, one reason why that is so confusing, if you have a matrix, you can, and that's in the step of framing, you will see that, there's actually 8 different versions of that identical matrix. So you have exactly the same information, but I can show it to you in 8 different ways by switching basically what's the rows and what's the columns, and in which order I'm ordering the categories. So it's actually the one reason why the matrix is so confusing is there's many different ways of showing the same matrix. So that's why we need to define it here. And then you can ask, okay, so where do these colored columns, I don't want to talk much about them, they're basically where's the information coming from? Is it coming from the environment, or am I free to set it somehow? For instance, if I'm training a classifier. The important aspect here is if you have these structures or these mappings, then one thing you can do is, or one thing you see is that the z dimension, the diagonal of the matrix, is always given or defined by the other two. So it's a consequence of the other two, and that's because in these domains, and that's not true for every domain, but in these domains, the diagonal defines the correspondence of the two categories, of the two dimensions. So as I said earlier, so if you're talking classification, the diagonal are the correct ones or the incorrect ones. So it basically says what I'm predicting and what is actually the case corresponds to each other. And the interesting thing now is if this is the case, we can actually simplify our grid model to something that looks like this. So that's the binary grid, but it only needs 4 cells. So because the other 4 can't exist, I simply only have these 4 cells. And if I now do the same thing again, so if I now project in one dimension along one axis, I get a matrix. And actually, there's another projection you can do. You can project this two-dimensional structure across, well, optically it would be basically you're projecting it on a plane, and then what you get essentially is a sequential order of the 4 cells. And that can be symbolized by a tree. So that's essentially, optically, it's nothing but a projection from 3 dimensions into 2, and then from 2 dimensions into 1 dimension. And importantly now, these arrows is shown very small here, but these arrows are bidirectional. So you can now, and that's because you only have these 4 cells, you can actually go back. So once, if I'm giving you one of these representations, you can actually get all the others if you want. So you can transform them into each other. Of course, that's not the only matrix. So as before, we can project this cube along each of its dimensions, and we get 3 matrices, and each of them gets 2 different trees or sequential orderings of the cells. And the important thing here now is basically that's it. That's all there is. So in one sense, they're all needed. They are all different. So they're not. They're basically the complete set of 2-dimensional and 1-dimensional orderings of this structure. And this structure is basically the structure that underlies all these domains. At the same time, as I said, they're all, you can, if I'm giving you one of them, you can get any other one, because you can transform them into each other. And that's really important. So they're in a sense, they're everything, they're the universe of these tasks. At the same time, they're exhaustive, so there's not more than this. And actually, if I could show, if I will skip this now, but we can actually show that this is the case, and there's actually each of these levels, this 3-dimensional level, and the 2-dimensional level, and the 1-dimensional level, they actually contain exactly the same cases. They all have 24 different versions, essentially. One thing that's also important to say is basically each of these representations introduces, so this one here, this top one is kind of a virtual one. That's kind of the true underlying faithful representation. The others introduce artifacts, representational artifacts, because they highlight or emphasize certain aspects that are not in this model. So for instance, each of these 3 matrices has the feature that there's 2 explicit dimensions and 1 implicit dimension, which is a lot harder to see, the implicit one. The same for the trees. Each of these trees has a hierarchy. So there's one queue that seems to be unconditional on the population, and a second queue that seems to be conditional on the first. But that's just a representational feature. That's not a feature of the domain. And that's really important for working with these representations later. All right. So the question now is, why are we doing this? So you could say this is a really hard and complicated way to explain what the positive predictive value of a task is. So we think it has some benefits, and namely, I want to mention 3 of them. So one is we can explain and explicate a great variety of scientific measures from different domains in a unified framework. That's our first claim. The second one has to do with Bayesian reasoning or properties of Bayesian reasoning. We think we can explain why certain tasks are easier than others. And we can provide a non-trivial version or definition or notion of representational transparency. So let me briefly argue each of these points. So what you see here is, if we look at the domain of clinical diagnostics, I think mammography problem, what I did here simply is I took the matrix from earlier, and instead of putting the frequencies in, or the probabilities, What I'm putting in here is the labels that are often used in the domain. So true positive, false negatives, and true negatives in the frequency matrix. What you can see then, well, you can ask things like, well, what is the number of correct cases? Namely, it's these and these, because of the correspondence relationship. You can normalize this into probabilities, and then you can ask about, for instance, accuracy. What's the accuracy in this setting? If you make these projections along either in a directional fashion, namely either column-wise or row-wise, what you get is you get here conditional probabilities that are pretty well known. Namely, so this cell here essentially is this value divided by the sum here. What you get is the sensitivity of a test, also known as true positive rate or as recall in some domains. And down here you get the analog is the specificity. And if you do this by row fashion, you get PPV, positive predictive value, and negative predictive value in the diagonal. So it's basically, you can obtain these measures that we're usually interested in. And the important thing here is we're showing in a structural geometric fashion how they can be produced from this structure. Then of course you can go wild essentially, and you can compute all kinds of things. So for instance, people are typically when they're dealing with 2x2 matrices, one elementary measure they're interested in is the contingency. And there's two different contingency measures you can compute it. So the contingency is essentially the difference between two conditional probabilities. And you can compute this again in a row-wise fashion. So you get a row-wise contingency and a column-wise contingency. And they have names and labels in various disciplines. And then you can use these and compute more comprehensive measures of matrix quality. And these are these triangular scores. So for the F1 score, for instance, is used in information retrieval, or a quadrangular score is many of you will be familiar with the chi-square metric. That's actually it basically combines these two contingency measures, and then you can get this is very connected with the Matthews correlation coefficient. And on the left here, what you see is you can also, rather than just combining contingencies or conditional probabilities, you can also divide one cell by another, and then you get likelihood ratios and odds ratios. So that's basically, what this framework explains is all these things are the same thing. They're basically based on projections on this 2x2 matrix. So let's fill it a bit more with content. So I said we could explain a lot of measures from different domains. And so here's essentially these positions in that framework illustrated for different, well, we basically say what are we talking about? Here's the frequency description and a probabilistic description. But then there's a name of a measure. So for instance, true positives or prevalence or sensitivity. And then what's hidden here is basically, so these are the terms typically in clinical diagnostics or in classification. They typically use a very similar terminology. But there's many alternative names for the same metrics. And if you look at domains like treatment and risk, there's often very different names for the same things. So there's actually measures that it's kind of interesting. I mean, I've been familiar with terms like relative risks or absolute risk or number needed to treat, but I've never seen them in the same framework. And they've always were for me different things. They're all part of this essentially. So what you can do with a table like this is essentially you can ask, well, how are things, what is a particular measure called in a different domain? So you can map the labels essentially. Or you can also identify certain areas of interest that seem to be interesting in some domain, but not in the others. And typically there's reasons why some domains don't have labels for certain measures. And actually, so this is only the first page of this. So the second one is this. So there's actually, it gets pretty complicated once you look into these more complex measures. But again, so you don't need to understand them here. So the important thing is some measures seem to be of great interest to many disciplines or domains, like the contingency, for instance. So people have probably heard from informativeness or Youden's index. They're actually all the same thing. And actually absolute risk reduction or absolute risk increase is also the same thing. So, and others, that's another one which is used in different domains. But others, like balanced accuracy, for instance, is only used in one domain, or things like number needed to treat or relative risk reduction sort of seems to be only be of interest in the domain of risk. Okay, so that's so I hope you believe me. So this was very fast, but I hope you believe me. We can explain or explicate a great number of scientific measures in this framework, and that's, I think, already an achievement. But beyond this, what I found actually most interesting is we can actually explain why certain tasks in Bayesian reasoning are hard or difficult or easy. And then think of this mammography problem in the three versions again. So what I'm showing here is essentially our explanation or our account why the probabilistic version is difficult, and the short version is essentially, well, if I'm giving people the probabilistic version, I'm asking for the positive predictive value, what I'm giving them is, I'm giving the prevalence, which is here, I'm giving them a conditional probability called sensitivity, and another conditional probability called false positive rate, which we have here. So basically what we are adopting, we are using a probabilistic matrix, and we are adopting a bi-column perspective on this matrix by giving this other information, because these terms can only make sense if you adopt this perspective on the matrix. But what you're asking for is actually the positive predictive value, which asks you to adopt a by-row perspective on these two cells here, and none of these two cells are given. In order to get them in the probabilistic version, you actually need to apply the Bayesian formula, and that's shown here. That's actually the account. So that's something I'd like to talk to some people about, but this, I think, is the account that Hofrage and Gigerenzer gave in their 1995 paper. So it's basically a representational account, but it's expressed in terms of complexity of computations. And I think what we are doing here is essentially we are providing also a representational account, but one that argues in terms of perspectives on the 2x2 matrix. So the reason why this is hard in the probabilistic version is, well, it's asking you to reverse a perspective and then assume a different one, and I'm giving you the information in kind of in a very distributed fashion, let's say. So why are natural frequencies easier? Well, that's the version in natural frequencies, and actually you can do exact mapping from the task to this matrix, and what you see is you're giving everything that's noted in green here is provided in the problem. So most importantly, what you're giving people is you're giving people this cell and this cell. Well, what is the solution? The solution is simply adopting a by-row perspective, and namely dividing this cell by the sum of these two cells. That's the solution here, and gives you the 8% PPV. So you're essentially suggesting the right perspective to people if you're giving them natural frequencies. And then the question is, well, why is the short menu format even easier for people? And here our interpretation of that is essentially, well, you're almost giving them the solution. Namely, you're giving them this cell value and the 103. So you're giving them the marginal sum, and all they need to do is basically divide this number by this number, and they're all even arranged in the right fashion. They're also, again, they're suggesting the right perspective. So essentially, it's to us, the perplexing thing is not that people are better with this task. The real question is, why are they not at 100%? Because essentially you're giving them the solution and people don't recognize it. That seems to be the problem here. So that's the short version of why we think what we can do. And actually, I express this now in terms of the phenomena. You can also, there's this framework of nested set theory, and you can essentially say, well, we essentially think like we've kind of solved this problem. So it's basically, I think this framework explains what nested set theory is never able to express, namely the structural and mechanistic features of this. But one thing that is, I think, would be interesting is to explore the relationship between this framework and the natural frequencies concept, because that's also interesting. All right, so I hope you believe that we can say something informative about Bayesian reasoning. The third point is provide a non-trivial definition of representational transparency. To do this, I need to go back to my first example, namely the Titanic. If you probably noticed, I didn't solve it. I didn't answer the question, so who survived, essentially, and there's this dogma of the Birkenhead drill that basically means women and children should be rescued first. And you can ask, how successful were they in following this? And interestingly, if you look at the example that I showed earlier with this frequency grid, the answer is, so if you look at these matrices, you can ask, well, which of those answers my problem? The solution is, well, none of them. So it's actually not solvable with these matrices. What you need to do, essentially, and so what I'm doing now in a very rough fashion is basically a reductio ad absurdum. I'm basically showing you two solutions which contradict each other. And then we're asking, why could I do this? So the two solutions that I'm providing is, well, I'm asking about adult males versus women and children. So what I need to do is I need to take this grid and need to reframe it by combining three categories. So there's the category of females or children. And versus the category of adult males. That's one of my dimensions here. And the other one is survival. Did they survive or not? If I have these numbers, so that's simply recategorizing the grid into a matrix that is of relevance here. So what I can do now is, well, so the question is, how successful were they? Certainly they weren't completely successful, because then no child or no female passenger should have died, provided they had enough rescue boats, of course, but they had. So the question is, we need to answer it in a quantitative fashion. So here's a solution. So what I'm doing here, I'm adopting a by-column perspective on this matrix, and what I'm computing is the risk of surviving based on group membership. So I'm asking, so how likely were adult males to survive? The solution is 20%. How likely were females or children to survive? And the solution is 70%. And now if you are clever, clever in a manipulative way, you can present this as saying, well, women or children had 3.5 higher risk of survival, or a 50% higher chance of survival. So you see, you can apply measures of relative risk or things like that, which make the effect seem larger. Okay, so that's this solution. And actually this shows it in a very non-transparent ways, because you've just shown you a bar graph of the probabilities, conditional probabilities. But you could also argue in the other direction, and literally you could actually, what we're doing here, we are reframing the matrix. We are asking, okay, so we are asking which of the passenger groups could actually be in conflict with this rule of the Birkenhead rule? And the answer is, well, male adults who survive, or children or women who died. They are in conflict with the rule, essentially. So if we only focus on these people, we can compute the odds ratio. And that's, we don't see it again, that's hidden here. But the odds ratio is 2.1 of these two cells. And what that means, essentially, is, well, for every dead woman or child, there were 2.1 men in rescue boats. And so, and I would argue that if you presented this result, you would probably get people to say, like, oh, that wasn't very successful. So it's because there were a lot of victims among the women and children and men who were rescued. And actually, it is true that historically the men who were rescued, they got a lot of criticism by the people later. Okay, so what I said already is so this is one way of presenting this, or of analyzing it, quantifying it, and presenting a result. And I presented another one that argues for the opposite conclusion. So what this shows is you can use this framework to compute certain metrics, but you need to know what you're doing. Because in the end, these representations of the results, they don't tell you whether I did the right thing. I mean, formally, mathematically, I did everything right. But I can argue this way or that way with the same data. All right, so the idea for the transparency now is essentially, well, when is a measure really transparent, or a representation? Well, it is transparent when it reflects the perspective adopted during the derivation of the measure. So the reason why these bar charts were intransparent is they lose everything about the perspectives that I've taken on this data. They are simply numbers in the end, and make a point, but you don't know what perspectives I adopted. So the idea, and that's the kind of the second phase of this model, which I'm not going into now, is basically you can use this to develop transparent representations, or also analyzing representations and asking, are they transparent? Because the question is, do they transparently reflect the perspective that you need to understand the problem? And I've brought you one example, because in this audience it's appropriate, I think. So that's, again, the mammography matrix up here. And this is the typical tree that is often drawn. That basically, if you take the problem information, so this is the bi-column perspective on the matrix, essentially. If you draw this tree, then you can say, okay, there's 1,000 women. The prevalence of cancer of breast cancer is 1%. So there's 10 of them probably have it. And then there's the sensitivity information that gives you the number of, the conditional probability of being diagnosed with cancer if you have it. So that's the sensitivity here on this edge. So that's the tree you can construct with the problem information. The question is this a transparent representation? And the answer is no, because it gives you the representation given in the problem formulation. It's very transparent of that. It adopts this bi-column view in the hierarchy of the tree. What you actually want in order to show what the the positive predictive value is the by-row representation. You want to adopt a different perspective on the same matrix, and this is this one. And here you actually have the two numbers that are of interest to you, namely the number of positively tested women, 103, and how many of them are actually diagnosed, 8, and you can actually immediately get the positive predictive value. So that's the transparent tree according to this definition of transparency. And it's kind of, so to us it's interesting that this is the one that is kind of always being used, and this one actually reflects the perspective in the solution. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to say. So there's, we think we can say something non-trivial about transparency. So what can we do with this? Well, we can use it for sign communication, risk literacy education, and for designing visual representations. And here I'm just flashing those slides to you. So this is a system we're currently working on that actually embeds this model in a virtual environment. So here you can actually rotate this cube model, and then you get these 2D representations, and from this you can either adopt a by row or by column perspective and get these tree representations. And you can use this to ask all kinds of probabilistic questions about this environment, and not just PPV and not the typical ones only. Actually, this is also being done right now. So this is actually a 3D virtual environment. So in augmented reality. So this basically this. If you're wearing these spectacles, this thing is hovering in the room essentially, and you can walk around it and inspect it from different sides, so to get the same experience essentially. But it's yet to be, so what we don't know at the moment is whether this is helpful at all. It might be that people simply can't deal with these 3D models. So that's just to show that you can do this. So let me conclude. So I think there's at least two theoretical contributions of this model. Namely, well, there is a model, and I actually think that the 3D model is actually distinct from the general pipeline. And we have a notion of representational transparency. The practical contributions of this is we can explain all these different measures from different domains in a unifying framework. And we can verify and design transparent representations, assuming this definition. The applications are clear, I think, science, education, or communication, namely explaining what a result means, will imply including its perspective, and risk literacy education. So basically, I would have been happy if when these measures were explained to me, sort of if they had been expressed in these terms, because for me it makes much more sense to see them in a framework that combines them all than to have them as isolated definitions and formulas that I just learned by heart. Okay, so that's where I stop. So I thank my collaborators, and thank you.
This talk is fantastic, and I'm very, very grateful, because it connects, of course, with another talk tomorrow, where we will be discussing visualizations anyway. So I hope that we'll keep all these memories for the discussion tomorrow, these representations. And as you know, of course, your framework is even more general, but double trees give you a lot of that too. So you can reach a lot of several perspectives, relative risk, etc., risk reduction, by using a double tree, which Christoph Wasser will be talking about. We don't have now time for many questions. I am sorry, but we will ask them tomorrow. Yeah, we will write down these questions and continue the discussion on this topic tomorrow, because my friend and collaborator Ulrich Hofrage wants to talk, wants to tell us something about social scoring. And because it's such a novel topic, we have decided to sneak in a talk on this, for me, completely new theme on scoring, which is so actual. People talk about scoring a lot these days. And I am very happy to be able to sneak this. But tomorrow, Hans-Jörg, you will be here tomorrow.
Yes.
And we continue the conversation, and you will remind us, of course, of the main.
While Ulrich is getting set up, can I make a quick comment on Hans-Jörg's talk?
Yes, please.
First of all, Hans-Jörg, thank you for seeing so much inside a 2x2 matrix. I really enjoyed that. And the second thing, in the chat, I posted to you a figure from our book that we were discussing earlier. There's two trees for the Titanic. I'm very happy people are getting interested in something that is characteristic of Southampton. And these two trees, they make exactly the same predictions. But one of them is a card tree, machine learning tree, and the other one is a fast and frugal tree. And you can see which one you find to be more transparent. So I just sent that slide on the chat.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have made some progress. First we only talked about mammography, and now we talk about mammography at Titanic, which is a progress. Very dangerous cases both.
Yeah, I would also like to start with thank you. Thank you, Hans-Jörg, for this presentation. I find it amazing. So when Gerd and I wrote this paper or published this paper in 1995, I find it amazing what happened since then. How many smart people jump on that, think about it, extend it, find aspects, and we are of course very grateful and pleased to see this development. And this is the first thank, and I have questions, but tomorrow or during dinner. And I want to thank Laura that she agreed to squeeze this in. So when I first said I do not want to present anything, I'll just be here and enjoy, but then I've seen that there are not so many participants here and that the program is rather light compared to previous retreats, and so I thought, yeah, why not ask? And then I learned it only yesterday or the day before yesterday that I am standing now here, and the time was not enough to prepare slides in a way that I would have loved to prepare them, but I do have some, and I want to share something with you. And this is part of, there's some bigger picture here. I found myself involved in some publications on digitalization that I would not have predicted some years ago. So this is all very recent if you look at the times here, and there's nothing before. So it started with this chapter 9 in this famous book, Wer wagt gewinnt, with Laura, where we have a chapter on digitalization. Then there was an article coming out of this summary, but also extension. And what I'm going to present today is number 3 in the list, chapter in the book on social credit rating, edited by Oliver Eberling, who is very much in this. He wrote his dissertation about social scoring. He's married to a Chinese woman. He spends much of his time in China. He knows the scene, he knows the architects of the Chinese systems. And this book that is coming out here is quite, let's say, it has a lot of stuff written by a lot of very famous and knowledgeable people, 700 pages. It's called a handbook, but still it's, I would say, quite amazing what he achieved here. And he also invited me via email. I had never heard about this name, Oliver Eberling, so we talked, and in this 1-hour discussion, where I made the decision whether or not I contribute, we talked about this perspective that I'm presenting to you today. So not only look at this as a tool, but the context. So how is this related to us, human beings? What is the social and the psychological aspects here? What's the origin of this tool? And the origin is, of course, we, humans. This is a human artifact. You do not find social scoring based on digitalization in the animal kingdom. Rabbits or lions or so don't do this. It's only us. So we created it. We run it. But then we also become objects. And I found this very interesting, this in how we are involved here and what we do with the system and what the system does with us. So this is the focus of today's presentation. For the sake of completeness, I should also add that Julian and I, we mentioned this morning, have a chapter in the Winds of Change, in the Bounded Rationality Handbook entitled The Winds of Change, the Sioux Silicon Valley Society and Simple Heuristics, which is also basically about the winds of digital change. And we are working on an article for a special issue. Gerd Schappnam, I think you're in the audience, so yes, it is still on our plate. We are working on it. I hope you're a bit tolerant with the deadline, but let's talk about this not here. So, I already said the title of this chapter, Mensch, Social Scoring als Mensch-System-Interaktion, it's in German. So Mensch, humans and their systems, this is the focus. On the one hand we have the individual, And then we have social scoring, and social scoring is, I would say, pretty old. We have it like for many, many decades, centuries, if not millennia. We measure men in a social setting. We develop scores that come from this social world. But now something is new, and what is new is the digital technology and how this boosted this measurement. So here we have, of course, on the one hand, Big Brother or big data. We have server farms, so this is data. Then in the middle we have algorithms. We have software that processes this data. And then we have devices or interfaces that connect us, individuals, with these data and with these algorithms. So our computers, our smartphones, they are able to deliver data to these server farms, but also to get data from there, processed by algorithms, of course. So, and as you know, China is doing this, and in this book, edited by Oliver Eberling, you will find more about this current state of the art. How far are they in China? He told me it's amazing to see the gap here. So we have millions of surveillance cameras, I guess 200 million by now, but then we have huge area in Switzerland where they do not even know who lives there. So when it comes to population counts, inhabitants in this area, they don't know, no one knows. No? So it's basically I don't want to say Stone Age, but there are no cameras and they do not even know the names of the people in the village. So it's amazing how fascinating this is there in China and what's going on. And I'm very happy to have this book soon in my hands and to learn more about it. Anyway, so this is going on in China, and for some people it's quite scary. And when I had a discussion with Laura, she calmed me down and said, yeah, you're always so pessimistic, and don't worry, this will not happen here in Europe. It cannot be the case that we, in the land of the free and democracy, will agree to have this social scoring technology implemented here. I responded, just wait. I mean, in social scoring in China, yes, there it's driven by the state, and this is quite another thing. But here we also have social scorings. We have companies who do this with us. So if you order a book in Amazon, it will be in Amazon's record, and they have also scores about us as customers. But now not the state, but companies. Or we have the Schufa. So this is different institutions, different purposes, but this is exactly the point what I have now in my next animation here. This little scoring system, or this little system as I call it, it's embedded in a larger system. Why is this a system in the first place? So you need a lot of agreements. You need to involve, there's political decision making behind it. We need to somehow change laws in order to allow for this data sharing or data processing, to implement consequences. So this is this little system, but it's embedded in a larger system, and if you embed the social scoring technology in China, something else may result compared to embedding it here, because our political system, economic system, is so much different compared to the Chinese system. So the title of this chapter, Mensch-System Interaktion, needs to take exactly this into account. And we focus on the interaction with a small system, but also on the large system, and how the small system can only be understood if you consider the wider context. So this definitely needs to be taken into account. This is our argument here. And to see this, consider this slide on this link between the individual or parts and the system. And consider this river. So what you have here, and I think it's a very good metaphor to also then apply it later to social scoring. We have the river, and in the river we have the water, and the water is flowing through some land. And the land will tell the river, no, here am I, no way for you, you go there, right? And the river, or the river bed, which is basically land, determines where the water will flow. On the other hand, we of course have at the beginning nothing, then there is some little water, and it finds its way over land, and then there comes more and more and more, and it is the water that determines where the riverbed is. And if you look at Grand Canyon, for instance, you see this. It's the water who did that, or that did this. So in this sense, it's not only the riverbed that determines where the water flows, but it's the water flow that determines where the riverbed is. And I think this is, as a metaphor, very useful to understand how man and systems are related to each other. There is this interdependency, this interaction. And this is exactly what I have in my next animation. So if we now replace us, human beings, so individuals, here, and put us in this river and think of us as water, and look at the systems we live in. And system includes, for instance, the Earth. So we are living on Earth. There are the laws of physics that determine a lot of things we do and can do and what our constraints are. We have to adapt here. There is the legal system that tells us what is allowed, what is not allowed. Society, there's the political system. We are included in the systems, and these systems do something with us. At the same time, we are shaping these systems. Right? So these are, I mean, not Earth, but at least political system, these are man-made. These are artifacts, and they can be changed, and we change them constantly. So here you again see this mutual link. This first direction, we change the system, is now 1 in my next slide. The system has an impact on us is 2, and this is exactly the idea of interaction, right? So I will now proceed by looking how the individual produces these big systems, and I will focus on capitalism, democracy, and communism. And here I do not only mean how it shapes these big systems, but also how these systems can be understood as originating from us, from human nature. To what extent do they express something that is within inside and that has then at some point been, let's say, put to the outside, and there we see it as a system. But I would answer the question, where do these systems come from? I would say from within us. And then in the second step, I will look at to this question, how is the influence in the other direction? And after we understood the interaction between us and the big systems, the next question is, how do this impact what we see in this little system, social scoring? So how is social scoring shaped and determined by what we discussed, or we'll discuss now in the next minute about the big systems. Yeah, and then how does social scoring impact us as individuals? What does it do with us? So it's a bit complicated, but I hope I can walk you through this and provide some insights here. So, if I look at you and point at you, for instance, Karin now, so what do I do if I have my fingers here? That's interesting. I say you there, and there's one finger pointing to you, and from my perspective it's to the outside, but then there are 3 fingers pointing back. And in fact, I would say every one of you agree it's very hard to think of an outside world ignoring you. So the moment you look at the world, you say, I am here and there's the world, and this comes together. There's also a state where there is nothing, and this is when we sleep. There is no inside world and there's no outside world. So in this way, inside and outside are connected to this other, and just think of this hand here, you have it as a, let's say, pictorial icon, as a representation of this mutual relationship between world out and me in. They come together and they disappear together. You cannot think of one without the other. So this is how we are organized in this, let's say, periodic change between states of sleep and being awake. I will refer to this as poles, as subject pole and as object pole. And I will start with the poles and come to the middle only later, in a little while. And what I have now is a table. The first row I'm now discussing is, for the lack of a better term, the psychological correlates. So what does it do with us to be in the psychological pole, or how does it feel? How is it expressed psychologically? And to be in the object pole. So being in the subject pole, I mean, it's about I. So here we have ego, we have egoism, we want to grow, we want to have power, we want to have control over what is out there. So basically every technology we invent and we run is about controlling what is out there. We want to be the master, we want to be in charge, and we want to reach our goals. And you guys, sorry to say this, but from my perspective, you are obstacles in traffic to some extent, right? And of course, I know that I'm also an obstacle in your traffic. So if you have a goal, I may be in your way. We call it competition, and we say that's normal. This is our life. On the other hand, it's not only us as egos and egoism, but there's also altruism. We also care for each other. We love each other. We want to belong. We need the protection of the group, the shelter of the group. I already talked about the earth and the laws of physics, and we are not only the master of the universe, as we are on the left side, this pole, but we also feel like we are little wheels in a big machinery, and whether we want something or not doesn't play a big role often. And we are just so little, and we shouldn't overestimate or we cannot underestimate how meaningless we are, dust in the wind, right? You know this song title. So here we adapt to the environment, and the environment is out there. This is maybe then often involuntarily, but often even voluntarily. We serve, we love, and love means basically we eliminate our subject pole. We take away what we want, and we function according to what the object wants from us. So the mother who gets up during night because the infant needs some breastfeeding, she is completely in the object pole. This is not I want to sleep. This is she wants to do what the other wants and needs. So this is the object pole. And then now let's go to the middle. In the middle we have the insight that I, from my inside, and you, who are on my outside, that I could flip it around. And I know exactly that Laura, from her perspective, will have the same, but now with reversed role. I'm the outside for you, and I know exactly you also have an insight and feelings and all this. And then the question is, how do we arrange our social life? This is also a political question, given that we are in the middle, in this we position. And of course we have to arrange. We have to bring these two poles, object and subject poles, somehow together. And here we have something that we feel inside as values, like fairness, equal treatment, negotiation. This is also this give and take. I need this, you need that. So we do trade, we have orders so that we all find our ways to live together. This is no longer the ego and the elbows, and this is no longer you are nothing, but we come to terms and agree and find something in the middle. And these are now the three poles that I want to discuss as, let's say, prototypical elements of our psychological constitutions as men and women, of course, so men as a species. The values corresponding to these three poles have been formulated in the French Revolution: liberty, égalité, fraternité. These values correspond exactly to what I just developed, and I developed it such that you understand how it comes from us, from the inside. Liberty corresponds to this: I want to go my way, I want to be free. It started as a political movement. They wanted to be free of these kings and landlords, so during time of feudalism and absolutism. Égalité, this is we together have to find a way to arrange things, and fraternity, today we wouldn't frater, this is brother, then some came, no, this is sisterhood, and this is of course also not complete, so today we would say solidarity. And that feminism in a way can be placed in the middle. Égalité, they said, we do not want to be second place, and you only talk about brotherhood, you men. We are also here. And this is driven by this impulse from the middle, égalité. Please respect us. And if this men only talk about brotherhood, that was indeed disrespected. And they, feminism has a complete right to say, we are also here, but this is something I would locate in the middle now. So, now on our way, we have the human constitution, we have the ideals, and this leads to systems. And these are exactly the systems I already had on the earlier slide. Capitalism is, the question is whether time allows to go into so much details now. I'm afraid not. Capitalism is a system that is based on ideas. Think of the word. Caput is the Latin head. Capita is plural. head, so many heads, but the head is the place where ideas come from. So capitalism is organized such that those people who have ideas, who have initiatives, who have ideas how to run things, how to build things, engineers or so, that they should go there and can go their way to find support, the money to build this stuff to serve society. And this is also then the whole banking system is basically there in order to give money to those people who have ideas and who then can promise, if you let me realize my idea, I will increase wealth and you can all participate and share, and I will make profit, but I let you participate in the profit, and the bank would say, yes, great, here you have our money, but you give me your interest. So basically capitalism, I would argue, is a system that implements this part of the human being, the subject pole. Communism is exactly in the object pole. Here we care for each other, and it's implemented in a system, and here the individual should count nothing. And the political system made sure that there is no one standing out. They should all serve. This was the political doctrine. And in the democracy, every vote counts equally. I could go much more into detail, but I think I'll leave it here and turn to the second direction. How do these systems shape us as participants in these systems? And here they come with the Janus hat. Probably this is true for all isms. All these isms are systems or ideologies that comes from, let's say, something, values that we understand. But isms tend to become rigid, and then it can easily backfire. So, what is the glory? What is the propaganda on the one hand, and what are the perversions on the other hand? So, if we look at capitalism, what I have here found in Google. The title here was The American Dream Vehicle. And of course the glory here of the capitalistic system is the American dream. You can make it. You can make it from the dishwasher to the millionaire. So if you're only smart and busy and full of good intentions, yes, you find your way in society. Yeah? So with your head, with your ideas, with your subjective you can go your way, and we create the system such that these individuals will be rewarded in our system. They should have their role. In fact, the whole society is based on this attitude. The perversion, I recommend watching the documentary The Four Horsemen. This is a documentary about the downside of capitalism, and there's a lot, in particular also from the left-wing parties. There's a lot who argue deadly against it and who cannot stop emphasizing the bad aspects of this world. The ecological footprint, and I think I do not need to go into this. Communism, the glory and the propaganda was, yes, you serve, you sacrifice yourself for the common good. We have the workforce to increase the wealth of the country. But it didn't really work because, it works within the family and within those set of people whom we know and whom we love. But if you make it a system and say this is now something we want to apply on the population level, people's love was not big enough to love the country and all these people in there whom they do not even know. So here, to some extent, human nature was violated, and the political system wanted something from these people they could not fulfill. And therefore, they had to be forced. And therefore, we have seen the gulags. We needed an economy that needed to be planned because the initiative was suppressed. We had a lot of initiative and freedom on the subject pole in capitalism, but in communism, not. So therefore, it basically broke down the system. We had poverty, and at the end, Fukuyama said, end of history, the better system won. And now we have a stable world after the enemy, communism, is gone. And we all know that the world is not so stable. Anyway, democracy, looking at the time, I think I should skip this. We are proud of not having dictators anymore in democracy. But if you look at the perversion, it also means we all have to be equal and no one should stand out. And Oh yes, maybe still one sentence. Where do we have this middle and the perversion in our, let's say, daily lives? We have it, for instance, in committee, in commissions, in bureaucratic processes, where we ensure that no one has too much power, ending up in endless discussion, ending up in a strong bureaucracy in Brussels, where even tomatoes and cucumbers are regulated, and they should have a certain size and certain something. So here we have equality in its, let's say, perverse forms. These regulation, making sure that no one stands out. And okay, I could go more into detail, no time. I will now come to the small system again, and small system means social scoring. This marriage between big brother, little brother, and artificial intelligence. So first, the social scoring system is of course something we find in the social world. And what do we have in the social world? We have rules. This is related to Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. We need rules because if we only live in the subject pole, we have anarchy. So people who just go their way, this will lead to chaos. So we need regulations, and this is now exactly the impulse from the middle. We shouldn't have a system where two strong individuals just impose their will on others. We should somehow balance this out and find compromises. This is exactly the idea of the middle. And here we need law and order. There, people have to play their role. We can talk about reputation. Reputation matters. This is how others see us. We need punishment to get people in function in line. We have trust. Behavioral economics is basically how people are willing to divide resources among them. We have dictator game, all these different games, trust game. Ultimatum game. So all these different games that somehow capture how people treat each other. Good. And then we have another aspect here when we talk about social scoring, and this is measurement and building models of man. And of course, Hans-Jörg, you just had it in your presentation also. What do we focus on? How do we structure? How do we represent things? What do we measure? How do we represent what we measure? So all these questions come into play here. How do we create measures of man? There's this book of Stephen Jay Gould, I recommend it, Measure of Man, and here we also have measure of man. And we measure by one single number, and this is the social score or the citizen score. But what is going into this score, and what will be done with this score? And these are all questions we have in the social world. So let's now apply the whole thing to the what we had said about the big system to the small system. So no need to have this again. I, others, and we.
5 minutes.
5 minutes? No, I'm on track. Psychological correlates, no need to repeat this. So what is measured? If you consider the subject pole, we measure how many prizes people got. So people win Nobel Prizes and Oscars and all these. Here we talk about power, status, wealth. So how far did someone make it in our society? How strong someone is? How, let's say, how good played this person is his or her role on the subject pole. On the object pole, we have exactly the opposite. Altruism, how much did a person contribute to the common goods? How selfish was someone? How much did someone serve? How much did someone donate? CSR, here we have it on the company. What did companies do for the for others? So to what extent are they socially responsible? And CSR is a big issue in management and ethics, and it's even measured. So we have measurement of how good, not how far you brought it, but how social you are, how well you are integrated in society and serve. And basically also when we pay taxes, this is something I would call maybe enforced love. You are forced to love others, and that means you are forced to give money that goes to someone else. And because authorities do not trust you that you would do it voluntarily, they will force you that you have to pay your taxes. but it's the forced contribution. You are brought into this position of being an altruist. You have to be altruistic here. If not, and now we are in the middle, you violate against the rules. Good. In the middle, fairness, playing by the rules. And what are the pros here? So if we now implement these measures into a social scoring system, and I would argue we can integrate measures of all three kinds, or from all these three poles. We have pros and cons, and being measured according to this, what we have here in this middle row, what is measured, has stimulating effects, and it brings people exactly where they are supposed to be according to the architects of the system. But then the con list is, to what extent does it backfire and have undesired side effects? So let's look at the pros. So all these prices, power, status, wealth, this kind of measurement increases competition, stimulates competition, and some people perform better if they are under competition. So if you swim alone, I had experienced this, I practiced, so I swim alone at a time, and then there was the competition, and everyone in the stair was, wow, I'm shouting, and I do not even know whether they are favoring me or someone else, but there was a big noise, and I was so much faster during this run. It's amazing how competition can stimulate and get more good out of us. Let's put it this way. But then, on the other hand, we want to be the first, which may lead someone to cheat, to bribe, to sabotage of opponents. So if people are brought in competitive context, they are very creative to find ways to be the first, and not all of them are ethical. So, and this is, of course, something you will get if you have a social scoring system that has elements of the subject pole integrated in the measurement. So, in the middle, rule conformity, this is something we want to have. We do not want to have cars driving like crazy to a playing child with children. We want them to slow down. This is the rule, and if you say if you are faster than 30 kilometers per hour, then this will reduce your social score, or if you cross the traffic light by a red, people will behave accordingly. They do not want to have lower score, so basically you impose rules, you have a surveillance system, and you implement a carrot and stick approach. This may lead to these interesting, let's say, effects, that there are consulting companies whose main task is not so much to help companies to run their business better, but to avoid taxes. And now the point is, avoid taxes in a legal way. So if you operationalize how you measure rule conformity, and if these rules are transparent, so there are also good reasons why they should not be transparent, right? But if they are transparent, then you invite this behavior. How can I, within the given rule, get as much out of me as possible? So if you have these kind of measures from this middle pole, rule conformity, in this device, then you invite, let's say, also unethical behavior, but still completely legal. This is now the trick, right? So on the right side, I need to come to an end. Carrot-stick approach might reduce willingness to share, because you want to share if you are on the object pole, right? If you want to give because you love someone else. How would you feel if this is measured and if you are rewarded for giving someone to someone else? I mean, this is in a way ironic. Think about this. You are rewarded for something that you want to give. How would you feel? At the end, you may feel like I give it because I get the reward. So the reward approach may drive out good intentions. So this is why we may have some backfiring if you include elements in the social score that can be, let's say, assigned to this object pole. Yeah, and I now, I think, should come to an end. Heisenberg's unprinciple. So if you measure something, you will modify what you want to measure with your measurement device. This is not critical with a thermometer when I want to measure whether I have fever. Now during Corona time, I take this thermometer, it has a few grams, I put it here. It will cool down my body and heat up the thermometer, but at the end, the heating up of the thermometer is what we want, and we want to measure what's the temperature here. That my body cools down doesn't matter, because we could say a few grams, 80 kilos, so this is negligible. Here, social scoring, it may not be negligible. So being measured may change the one who is measured. This is what I had in my last slide. And this is now something where we want to, or need to discuss, do we want this? Hawthorne effect is also, people behave differently if they know that they are under survey, observed. And we may find a reduction of variance among individuals because all are now measured with the same measurement device, and to the extent that this is public and transparent how we are measured, and to the extent that we adapt, we will all be quite similar. And this will bring us all in the middle. Remember this marching army, we are all be the same. So we increase homogeneity in the society and drive out variance, drive out heterogeneity, may kill creativity. We will find a lot of opportunistic citizens who just want to have a high score. And it's risky to not conform. And the most danger is here that we have this slippery slope. It goes not overnight, but every day we may shift a little bit, and we may not even notice. I'm not explaining this. And we may not even notice how we change as a society, as individuals, due to these devices that we create. So we are the creator, but the same thing that we created will to some extent create us or shape us, and we may not like the effects. But the hope is that we are aware of this and that we are still in control and that we are not victims of something that we created ourselves. And this is exactly this homunculus debate and all this. And there's so much to say. Thanks for now. Sorry for being so short. And I hope, do you have some time for discussion? I don't know. Anyway, thanks.
This has been recorded, as you know.
Yes.
All right.
I forgot it while I was talking, but I raised my hands when you asked, do you agree? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Gerd Giger, I have a question.
Yeah?
It's a very interesting topic, and I want to throw in a few facts in this thing as to the social credit scores. So social credit score means that everyone gets a number based on the credit history, on the criminal history, on social activities, political activities, the entire digital fingerprint, and also the credit scores of one's friends. So in China, surveys show that about 80% of the people are in favor of having that and think it's fair. And there's a difference between the poor and the rich Chinese. So being in favor of the system is more frequent among the rich ones and the well-educated. So in Germany, so I did a survey 2 years ago in Germany, who would be in favor of having a social credit score in Germany. 2 years ago, 90% against, 10% in favor. We repeated it last year already 20% in favor, and thought that would be fair, like here. We did not use the word China, but we described the system just as I did before, punishment and things. So there is, if that dynamics goes on, then we can wait a few years, and most Germans will be of the same opinion like the Chinese. Second comment on the digital revolution, it is not about adding smart homes, online dating, and other gimmicks. It's, I think, as Uli had indicated, a real transformation of the society, including our values, and including what we think is good and bad. For instance, Germans, based on their history, not long ago went out on the streets to demonstrate for privacy and against the infringement of privacy by the governments and companies. Now, these days, this value has gone most for the way. There are still many people would say, that privacy is the greatest concern. So we did with the insurance company Ergo last year a survey in Germany and asked people, assume that you could pay for social media, and none of your data would be collected and used for advertisers. How much would you be willing to pay to keep your privacy? What do you think? What would most Germans pay, or what would be the average amount of euros per month? So you pay for Netflix, you pay something between 10 and 20 euros, depending on the program that you hire per month. So what do you think about the privacy? Now, the same Germans, and it's over 50% who say that privacy is their greatest concern in the digital revolution. This is the same group, and 75% of Germans are not willing to pay a single cent. There are few who are willing to pay up to €5. So if 75% are not willing to pay anything, at the same time are concerned about privacy, that's called the privacy paradox, we are moving into a similar situation where convenience and not being to pay is taken as the accepted business model. And this business model implies what's Shoshana Zuboff has called surveillance capitalism. That means that the customer is no longer the user, the customer is the advertiser, and the tech company does everything to keep our time, to take our time, to take our attention and our sleep, and do all psychological tricks like likes, notifications, and the rest of Skinnerian intermittent reinforcement schedules. And that is what I see the German or the European sleepwalking into a surveillance state.
Before we go to the coffee, as you know, the Germans don't want to pay €5 because the Germans think the state must guarantee this privacy. So it's not their business to pay €5. So this is excessive capitalism where you even pay from your own money to prevent others to know whether you prefer one writer or the other. So the Germans think this is not their level, so the government should do this.
Now, look, but the Germans shouldn't also be so stupid in thinking that Facebook and Google would work for nothing. They have a right to make profit. And if you don't want to pay, who should then pay for your services? No, it's the advertisers. It can't be the government.
Privacy, but okay. Yeah. So there is a big debate about this and what Germans think about privacy. Yeah. And
I would like to recommend draw your attention to an article in Die Zeit by Bude und Stab, da passt noch was dazwischen, who discussed the Chinese model and the Western model as follows. In the Chinese model, there's a deal between the government and the citizens, and the deal is we collect your data, whether you want it or not. You're not asked. We have the cameras, but what you get is privileges. So if you obey, you get a better score, and this pays. And citizens are not asked. In the Western world, citizens are asked, but practically the question is ridiculous, because here the deal is you can use our services and therefore we get your data. And this is what Amazon says, this is what Google says, and by using their services, we feed them. And of course, we could say, no, I'm refusing to have a cookie here on my computer, but then you cannot open the website, right? And what do? You accept the cookies, and then they collect all your data, and what you get is service. And the service is on the subject pole, because now you are in more power. You have all the information. You can use the internet. You can get this and this and this and that. So here we have exactly the what I said before, the deal on the subject pole, and they are seducing us. You become very powerful and strong. No? Just give us your data.
And here would be the role of the governments to stop the pay with your data business model and make the companies go back to the usual business model where the customer pay. And then the entire rest of the problems, like young people not having any attention, some of them being made addicted, would not even emerge. And social media could function as well, and Google could function as well if you all would pay something without the negative consequences.
Bude and Stab argued with their title, Da passt noch was dazwischen. We should not adapt the Chinese model, but we should also be very careful not adapt the American model with this forget about privacy, give us your data, we give you your service. The model that they propose, and this is exactly the model that would be located in the middle, is what Gerd said. Have governments in place, have rules in place, and put limits and boundaries to these companies.